Hello and welcome to Sunday. Major cliffhanger at the end of last chapter. Getting ready to do chapter 45, Air. Very important if you don't have it. Our hero doing well, then all of a sudden things not going so well, and then I froze. I couldn't move. It took my mind a moment to catch up. What had just happened was just too sudden, too quick. The implication was unthinkable. There was no way this could be happening. And yet somehow this was real. I was buried alive. Chapter 45, Air. No. The rock was frozen solid. I couldn't move. I couldn't move at all. It wasn't like being tied up, where I could wiggle and squirm against the ropes. And it wasn't like being buried in a coffin, where I had air to breathe and a bit of space. The liquid rock had been all around me, flowing over me like water. When it turned solid, it was a perfect mold of my body. So when I say I couldn't move, I mean nothing could move. I couldn't move my hands, not even the tiniest bit. I swallowed and my Adam's apple fought to shift against the natural dip in the rock where it rested. My eyes were closed, but even my natural eye movement felt constrained. I was like a flying amber, or one of those mammoths that had fallen into the tar pits. Snap out of it, my analytical side demanded. You have about a minute to fix this before you go unconscious. I'm going to be a damn fossil, I wailed. This is literally life or death, my analytical side screamed at me. I'm buried alive, I screamed back. You're going to be buried dead real quick if you don't fix it, he screamed again. That was actually kind of funny, and I wanted to laugh hysterically. I wanted to tell Annabeth all about it over a nice cup of tea. I wanted to murmur the story to Tyler as we snuggled up in bed together. I wanted to kick back with John over a nice ale and hear him chuckle. Smack! My analytical side hauled back and let me have it. That was rude. I was already about to shit myself with fear, and he was hitting me. Actually, that would be a terrible thing in my current situation. The shit wouldn't have anywhere to go. Either the fart gas would kill me, or I'd rupture internally. Wow, guys, look at this fossil. It looks like he shit himself and blew up. I've never seen that before, said archaeologist number 1. That's a crappy way to go, laughed archaeologist number 2. They'd high-five each other over my calcified body. Smack! Snap out of it, my analytical side demanded again. Then his eyes lit up. He had an idea. This is a puzzle, he said quickly. A life or death puzzle. A mage is buried in rock and he has a minute to live. What does he do? I froze. I couldn't think. When I was a kid, my dad had sent me into the crawl space under the house. He had the brilliant idea that I was going to fix something with a pipe. Instead, I got stuck. I could feel spiders and bugs all over me. The darkness had felt like a physical thing, pushing me down. I'd screamed over and over again. He'd pulled on the rope he tied to my leg, but I was really stuck, and that didn't help. Instead, I thought he was going to pull my leg off. Mom had called 911, and a lot of people had showed up to rescue me. After that, I hated the dark, and I hated small spaces. I stayed in well-lit open areas. Even the closet was too small and dark for me, and I'd pulled all my clothes out into the room. When I'd gotten my magic sight, my fear of the darkness had faded. Even now, with my eyes closed, I could still see. My fear of tight spaces had faded too. As an adult, there wasn't a need to go into small areas. I'd almost forgotten I was claustrophobic. Until now. Now I was very aware of my fear. The little boy in me was back under the house again. There was no one to help me, no one to save me, and the spiders and bugs were coming. I wanted to scream and scream and scream some more. Smack! A mage is buried in rock. What does he do? I don't know. What does he do? This is a puzzle. Seconds are ticking away. What does he do? Air! Air comes first. Air, shelter, water, food. That's the order of wilderness survival. I learned that on a camping trip. I'd learned a lot of things on that camping trip. Dad had drunk beer and gone mountain fishing with some of his friends. Meanwhile, one of the other sons had showed me a mountain of his own. I'd come away from that experience knowing the basic rules of survival, how to pitch a tent, and how to light the fire that's in all boys' pants. Schmack! A mage is buried in stone. What does he do? It felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done as I took my scared little self, my inner boy, and locked him away. I'd scream, cry, and wet the bed later. Right now, I needed to live. This was a puzzle. I was great at puzzles. Time to prove it. I needed air, which means I needed air holes. Who makes holes? Miners do. I didn't get fancy as time was of the essence. I created him as fast as possible. Boots, overalls, miner's hat, goggles, and a big mustache. I gave him a pickaxe of rock busting plus 20, slapped on as much detail as I could in 2 seconds, and filled him with magic. I forgot the damn duplicator ring, so I added that, plus the resize ring. Then I duplicated him and turned his first clone loose. He began hacking at the rock around my mouth and started the tunnel leading to the surface. He was going as fast as he could, but I could see at a glance it wasn't anywhere near fast enough. I duplicated a second miner and sent him down to help the first guy. Oh, only that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to work. They worked great side by side, and it made a bigger hole, but it didn't make a faster hole. I'm normally a begin at the beginning, finish at the end kind of guy, but this was going to get me dead. What I needed was a bunch of them working all along the length of the tunnel at the same time, which is exactly what I could do. Duh. I think of my soul creations as little people, so they act that way. If I need them to go somewhere, they fly there, avoiding all the obstacles they can. But they are made up of magic, and magic can go anywhere. It takes longer for it to move through something dense, like stone, but it can do it. I quickly figured out where I needed the air holes to be. Duplicated my miner again and started sending his fellow pickers through the rock. As soon as they arrived in the right space, they started hacking at the tunnel. Don't make the air hole too big, my analytical side noted. Carl probably thinks you're dead. If he sees a big hole in the ground, he'll know you're alive and come after you. That was good thinking. I need to make a lot of air holes, and they probably needed to be scattered all over the room. That way, if one got blocked, the others would still work. Right now, though, I needed air. Any air, no matter how small, would be enough to keep me alive. I was starting to feel it. It wasn't bad yet, but I really needed to breathe. My heart was racing, and I could feel the blood pounding in my head. My adrenaline was great when I was in a fight, but it was terrible in situations like this. Wait a minute. This was a puzzle, and part of that puzzle was giving myself enough time to come up with a solution. T, I called frantically. I'm here, he said quickly. How can I help? Slow my body down, I commanded. I've read stories about Kung Fu monks that could go a very long time without breathing. I need that now. I just need to be able to think and do magic. Everything else can stop. I'll give you as long as I can, he said. He bowed and then went to work. Almost immediately I felt my heart slowing down and the need to breathe eased up. I kept duplicating miners and sending them all up and down the air tunnel. They were doing their best, but the rock was hard and they had a lot of it to get through. Carl had made sure to bury me deep. I figured I had about 4 feet of stone I needed to tunnel through. It's great the rock is breaking up, but how are you actually going to get it out of the tunnel? My analytical side asked. That was a great question. I needed all the rock chips out of there so the air could flow. I would normally use my ass blasters, but there wasn't anywhere for them to take the rock to. Also, they were kind of slow, and what I needed right now was speed. Help me! Somebody help me! My little boy surfaced for a moment, but I pushed him away again. Nobody was coming, and nobody could help me. Even if Tyler showed up right now, he wouldn't know I was buried in the ground. Even if he did know, he still couldn't get me out in time. The only person who could save me was myself, and that's what I was going to do. My heart rate slowed even more. I started feeling heavy, lethargic. That was excellent. As long as I could think and use magic, I was good. I continued duplicating miners as fast as I could, filling with magic and sending them on their way. The lower part of the tunnel was finished, but the upper part hadn't even gotten started yet. It was taking the miners too long to phase through the rock. Tea slowed my heart down even further. My fingers and toes started tingling, and then I went numb. The first air hole was only going to be 1/8 of an inch wide. I'd kept it small so the miners could dig it quickly, but on its own it wouldn't provide much air. I had lots of miners working the first tunnel, so I started a second and then a third. The real limit on speed was how fast they could move through the rock. The need to breathe was intense. My body wanted to panic, but T wouldn't let it. Instead, he slowed it down even more. I thought about what to do with the rock chips. I could leave them and the air would get around them, but it would be such a small amount I wasn't sure it would keep me alive. I needed to clear them out somehow. Just change them to air, Penny suggested. I can do that? I asked. You did it when you changed the color of glass at Henry's shop, she replied. When you created Captain Clean, you made his cape red. You did it once, you can do it again. The need to breathe was intense and the urge to panic was rising. T took me down another level though, and I held it together. I focused on my lips, then I focused on just one tiny chip of stone. Be air, I commanded. Nothing happened. Go! Nothing. Damn it! Change already! I was crying inside. My little boy took over and started kicking the walls of my cage. I raged at the rock and screamed to the heavens. I cussed, I clawed, I climbed into a ball, I curled into a ball and wept. I wanted Tyler so bad. I wanted him here to hold me, to kiss me, to tell me everything was going to be okay. Instead, I was going to die alone, buried in the ground, and nobody would know what happened to me. T took me down another level. I couldn't feel anything now. I was just thoughts, rage, and sorrow. Penny was with me, and she hugged me first. She felt more real, more present than I'd ever felt before. Hush, my source, she said kindly. Rest in the earth. Feel the pressure. I've spent most of my life in the ground, resting in one spot. Sometimes you run too much. This is good too. She wrapped me in love and shared images of heat and pressure, and how wonderful that was. This wasn't scary at all. For her, this was coming home. Being in rock was new for me, and change can be frightening, but this was her realm. She could feel all the different minerals and stones around her. They spoke to her and welcomed her. She looked at me like a goddess. I was with her. I was going to be okay. The miners were working on the last foot of the tunnel. I wasn't going to make it, but Penny was with me. I was at peace. There were worse ways to die. The mark of the deep earth hugged me next. Silly boy, it whispered. Nothing dies. The earth is where you go to live. You are with me. You are a mineral in my ground. I love you. I will always love you. You can come to no harm in my home. I felt molten lava caress my skin. I felt the tangy taste of minerals on my lips. I heard the voices of the rocks all around me, and I saw them as Penny saw them. Before, they had just been stone. Now they were so much more. I saw all the colors of the rainbow, and I heard their voices. They were happy stones, melancholy stones, and everything in between. Some voices were tiny and some were big. Some were all together and some were scattered throughout the room and beyond. I felt like I rested in the stars. I was a constellation living in the night, and it was beautiful. My seedling, the mark of the Lagerel, spoke up next. Be at peace. All seeds feel as you do when first they enter the ground. I felt a timeless majesty sweep over me. It spoke with the wisdom of countless trees that had once shivered in the soil. The earth is your home. Don't be afraid of your home. You will reach the sky soon enough. I felt what it was like for a seed to crack open, for roots to go down, for a shoot to rise up. A tree was the marriage between earth and sky. The mark of the laurel embraced me, and I embraced it back. I wasn't afraid of the stone, as a seed can grow anywhere. It wasn't afraid of our time in the ground. This was just the normal and natural process. It was so full of life I had to smile. I didn't need to be afraid. I was with friends. I looked up and my miners broke through to the surface. It was time. I embraced the rock chips that were resting against my skin and changed them to air. It was easy. I simply believed, with magic, and it happened. The result was explosive. The air kicked me in the face and vented all the pressure up the tunnel. Lots of chips blew out the top of the air hole like it was a volcano before falling back down again. What the heck was that? I asked my analytical side. I think that was a difference in density, he said thoughtfully. Air is a lot less dense than rock, so when you transmuted it, the new air took up a lot more volume. Hence the small explosion that just happened. It was probably a very good thing that your earlier attempts at converting rock to air failed. If that pressure hadn't had an outlet, you might have crushed yourself. Damn, that'd have been a close call. I needed to be very careful with transmutation in the future. I thought about creating a small space all around me with my new ability, but that didn't sound like such a good idea anymore. I'd stick to using miners for something like that. Meanwhile, I still needed to cover my tracks. Surfers, I called. Take all the rock chips that just came out and make sure they are scattered around the room. Don't leave any by the hole. I got a thumbs up as they got to work. Penny, using my senses, can you see Carl and Marius? I asked. Of course, she replied. Please keep an eye on them, I instructed her. I think they are probably too busy with Carl's injuries at the moment to notice my little eruption, but just in case, watch them from now on and let me know if they act suspicious. Carl is helping Marius right now, she reported. I think you're right, and they didn't notice anything. Good. Now I still need to clear out the rest of my air hole. I didn't want to do another air transmutation volcano. I'd gotten away with one, but I wasn't sure I could get away with a lot of them. I'd blown out the top foot of rock chips, which meant that I still had about 3 feet to clear out. Dudes, I called, as soon as you're free, start taking chips out the top of the tunnel, and do it as fast as you can. They had the resize ability, so they could become small enough to fit in the tunnel. Even with their speed, it was still going to take a while to clear it out. I needed to try something else. I appreciated how comfortable and loved my marks had made me feel, but the simple fact remained, I needed air. Well, I couldn't go bigger, but I could go smaller. I zoomed in on a rock chip on my lip. Before it had been a rock, but now it had been just a rock. But now I could see it was mostly dark blue with a touch of light blue. It seemed easygoing and it wouldn't mind if it changed. That was nice because I could also see it had a whole lot of space inside it. I just reached in and took all the space out. The process was fast, and unlike the air transmutation, it didn't seem to take much magic. It was still the same stuff, only it fit into a much smaller area. This could work. I compressed a lot of chips and gained another foot of open space at the top of the air hole. I ran into a problem at that point, as the chips I needed to compact were getting farther and farther away from my skin. As such, it was costing me more magic. I solved that problem by breaking up the rock all over my chin and down my throat. I compressed them, which gave room for the dense chips by my lips to fall lower. That let fresh chips fall down the tube, and I was back in business. The dudes continued to help, and in about a minute, I had air. Life-giving, beautiful air. I was sucking it through a tiny opening but still, it was air. I started 2 more tunnels, and this time I made Ass Blaster 2000s to clean out the chips from all the tunnels. They would be slow, but they'd get the job done. "How are we doing, T?" I asked. I appreciated being at this weird meditative level, but I knew it couldn't last forever. "You are good right now," he replied, "but I can't keep you suppressed like this for much longer. If I do, you're going to start getting damaged. I can't start bringing you back to normal, though, as the air you're breathing is really stale. You have an air hole, but it's not doing everything you hoped it would." I gave my analytical side a questioning look. "That makes sense," he said thoughtfully. "We have a hole, but we don't have any airflow. When you breathe out, your stale air is filling up the small space by your mouth and then flowing up the tunnel. When you breathe in, you're pulling all that stale air back into your lungs again. I'm sure you're getting fresh air every time, some fresh air every time, but it isn't much." I checked the other air holes. They were being worked on, but they still weren't anywhere near ready yet. "We also have one more major problem," T spoke up. "And what would that be?" I asked. Air was a pretty big freaking problem. What could possibly be as important as that? "Your core body temperature is dropping," he said. "The stone is relatively cool, probably about 50 degrees or so, and it's leaching away your heat. Normally I'd help you shiver and create warmth, but that is a very oxygen-intensive process. Right now I've got you at the lowest heart rate possible, and all of your voluntary muscles are completely relaxed. I've even slowed down your basic processes like digestion to keep your energy expenditure to a minimum. This is what you need to survive with almost no air at the moment, but it means you are completely vulnerable to the cold. Air, shelter, water, food. That's the order of wilderness survival. Number 2, shelter, was sneaking up on me faster than I'd hoped. The rule of thumb is that you can last 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. What I needed to do was put on a warm jacket or wrap myself in a nice blanket. That wasn't going to happen. Instead, I had the opposite situation, as my tumble down the road had shredded all my clothes. The cold rock had access to every part of me, and it was slowly turning me into a cadaver. "I wouldn't suggest heating up the rock," my analytical side said anxiously. "It would be far too easy. It would be far too easy to make it too warm, and you'd end up baking yourself. Cooked flesh is not a good look on you." "Don't worry," I gave him a big smile. "I wasn't planning on doing anything of the sort." So what are you gonna do?" my analytical side asked warily. Apparently he didn't trust me. In all fairness, he had good reason. Not all of my ideas are good ones, and some would even say I was a bit rash. "Red," I called, "how would you like to gain a new power?" "Oh boy," he explained. "Yes, for sure. Let's do it." "You don't even know what it is yet," I teased him. "It doesn't matter," he vibrated in excitement. "Bite me with the spider, green me up with a gamma ray, slather me with some kryptonite." That last one was so not right, but he got high marks for enthusiasm. I zoomed into his surface and checked him out. He had his vines growing through his hexagon, which split his surface into 6 areas. The top area had a round shield, showing his role as my defense. It wasn't actually a rune, but intention is everything, and I liked it there. The bottom area had the coil, showing his ability to store power, store magic, and power T in his grove. The upper right contained 4 eyes, 4 ears, and mouth, containing his 4 eyes, 4 ears, and mouth that allowed him to sense and communicate with the world around me. My new force rune was on the lower left. That left 2 more areas for me to work with. "Red, I'm going to ask you and your fellow hexes to defend me. This time I need your protection from extreme temperatures." He vibrated happily, but his 4 eyes looked a little confused. "I'm a biological being, and we work very well when our body is in a certain temperature range. If we get too hot, we suffer things like sunburn and heat stroke. If we get really hot, We bake like a Thanksgiving turkey or even burst into flames. Lots of mages take advantage of this by throwing fireballs, or they go the creative route and try to roast me alive like Eugene did in our match. On the colder side, we don't do well either. We'll get frostbite and loose fingers and toes. If our body temperature drops too low, we freeze up and die. That's what's happening right now. Red blinked all his eyes in understanding. So I'm going to give you the ability to keep me at the right temperature. Just work with T on what that should be. There will be times when I'm sleeping when I like it cooler, or I'm getting ready to work out and I like it warmer. Overall, though, it shouldn't change that much. This may not seem like such a great power, but heat has already been used against me in a fight, and right now, you're going to save my life by keeping me nice and warm. I'm excited, Red said happily. Saving your life is a big deal. Let's do this. I thought for a minute about what to add. I thought about the image of a blanket, but that would be hard to draw, and it leaned more towards keeping me warm, not keeping me cool. I thought about a thermostat, but that seemed a little generic. Then I had it. Since this was so important right now, I chose the upper left part of Red to work with. He only had 2 free areas, so I didn't have a whole lot of choices. I started with the snowflake to represent his new cooling powers. I went with the classic 6-spoke design and added lots of crystal spikes to it, just like a real snowflake. Then I added wavy lines rising off of it, like it was a cartoon figure baking in the sun. I paused and gave it an overall look. It had detail and personality, just the way I liked it. It seemed like it wanted something more, though. Something was teasing at the back of my mind. I rested in the rock, letting the idea come to me. I couldn't wait too long, but I wanted to get it right. Then I got it. Snowflakes and heat make water. While I was here, it made sense to have Red and his team be a water barrier as well. I made a wavy circle around what I'd made so far, and then added several water drops outside of the circle. Now it seemed perfect. Red, I added another power for you as well. We biological creatures also need to regulate our moisture. If we have too little, we die and look like a shriveled up mummy. If we have too much water, we die and look like something they fish out of the ocean on those detective shows. That is excellent, Red vibrated happily. We'll keep you warm and dry, but not too warm and not too dry. Don't worry about anything. We've got it from here. I gave Red one more overall check, but he seemed fine. I gave him magic and pushed the changes out to his fellow hexes. They powered up their new ability and then passed it on. It took a minute and a lot more magic than I expected, but soon I was protected from unhealthy temperature and moisture. Survival item number 2, shelter, was now taken care of. Check the box. Call it done. I'd used a lot of magic so far, and I was feeling pretty thin, so I reached out to Penny and got a refill. As magic flooded into me, I started feeling better. I hadn't realized just how low I'd gotten. You handled that really well, my analytical side said proudly. It gave me a look like I was a puppy that had just learned its first trick. I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or offended. Given the fact that I was buried in stone and dealing with low oxygen, I decided to be flattered. Since you're using Red in new and unconventional ways, he continued, you might want to consider asking him to protect your nose and mouth from any rock dust or allergens. A sneeze or cough at the wrong time could alert Carl to your presence. Also, a runny nose right now might foul up your breathing and kill you. I thought that was an excellent idea. I passed it on to Red, who's only too happy to protect me in yet another way. Now I had temperature, moisture, and dust under control. I went back to working on my air situation. The miners had busted through on the second tunnel, and now the ass blasters were sucking up rock chips and hauling them out. Waiting for that second air tunnel to clear out was like waiting for a pot to boil. It took forever. I just floated in my rock world, enjoyed my rock lights, and practiced my rock patience. Finally, all the rock chips were gone and the tunnel was open for business. It helped my air situation, but not as much as I'd hoped. When I'd breathed out, my stale air vented down both tunnels now, and all that stale air still got sucked back in on my next inhale. I've needed fresh air to flow down one tunnel and out the other one. What I needed were some fans. So I made some. I didn't get fancy and give them personalities or anything. I just needed them to spin their little fan blades and push air in a direction. I placed one inside the end of the first tunnel that pulled air in from the room. I placed the second one in the second air tunnel and had it push air out. That fixed my stale air problem and made T very happy. He gradually brought my body back a bit from its deep meditative state. I still didn't have anywhere near enough air to come back to full power, though. I was still living on what I could get through a hole only 1/8 of an inch wide. Trust me, that isn't a lot of air. My other air tunnels were being worked on, though, so while I waited, I took the time to plan out my breathing strategy. Carl and Marius would eventually start moving around the room, so it wouldn't do for me to pop up air tunnels anywhere on the floor. I wasn't worried about them noticing the holes, as I was going to keep them small, but a simple bit of dirt on the bottom of their shoes could cut off my air supply. I mapped out several air holes along the edges of the room, mostly behind crates. I told the miners and ass blasters the plan and gave them an order of importance. Thank goodness my little soul creations were self-directed. I couldn't imagine trying to manually clear out all these tunnels. The third air tunnel finished, and then the fourth. Individually, the tunnels were small, but together they were starting to create a decent bit of airflow. I breathed easier, and tea brought me a little closer to normal. I was glad I was getting back to normal body functions, but it was also raising my anxiety level. I was no longer feeling all peaceful, trippy, dippy, look at the glowing rocks, wow. The rocks still glowed, and I heard their music, but I was getting back in touch with the fact that I was buried alive. I needed to keep my mind busy, so I started planning for the future. Now I could breathe, I needed to start making room to move, and I needed to start planning my escape. I looked at all the rock around me and realized just how big a task that was going to be. I was going to be tunneling through a huge amount of stone. For my escape, I couldn't just tunnel straight up. After being immobile for a long time, there was no way I was going to be able to burst out of the ground. I needed to come up on the side of the room and sneak out of this place. To clear all this out, I was going to need a large excavation tunnel and a place to put all this stone. I couldn't just dump all my mined rock into the room, as it would certainly get noticed. The walls around the room were solid, except for the part of the wall which was man-made. Behind that was a passage I couldn't see the end of. I'd been thinking about just coming up on the side of the room, but it would be a lot easier to work my way out of the ground behind the man-made wall. Once I was up, I could see where the passage led to and maybe escape that way. If it was a dead end, I could at least have a moment to stretch my legs and get my mobility back. Then I could wait until both of them were gone, go through the man-made wall, and sneak out. I decided that was the best plan. However, I was buried at the back, and the passage was way off to the left. Instead of only having to excavate about 8 feet over and a few feet up, I was going to have to mine through 18 feet of rock. Damn, that was going to take a lot of magic. When I'd been cleaning up the park, I'd used some of the magic I'd discovered to power the grannies and keep the cleaning going. In this case, the rock didn't have any magic, so all that power was going to have to come from me. I've been feeling like I had plenty of magic to work with, but now I wasn't so sure. Okay, I now had a plan for the rest of my air holes and a plan for escape, but I still needed a good place to dump all the rock I was going to mine. I didn't see any great options until I looked down. About 10 feet under me was a whole other cavern. It had plenty of space to handle all my excavation, and best of all, it had water. Once I had a tunnel, I could have my dudes carried up, one swallow at a time. I now had all the bases covered except for food. I decided to wait till later to worry about that. Carl and Marius had to eat, so maybe they'd leave food lying around and I could steal it. Or maybe I'd transmute some rock chips into dense food. Or maybe I'll be out of here soon and not have to worry about it at all. So, have you given up on the idea of being rescued? My analytical side questioned. I haven't given up, I replied, but something has obviously gone wrong. They should have been here by now. The only thing I can control is what I do. So I'm going to work on getting out of here, and if I get rescued, that's gravy. Okay, the only thing I control is what I can do. There we go. You know, you might have read Tyler's signals all wrong, he said thoughtfully. He waved at you, but that could have just meant, wait a minute, or go back to the house again. It didn't necessarily mean he understood and knew what you were doing. Come to think of it, neither he nor John know what Carl looked like. You and Annabeth are the only people who've seen him and Marius. The night was dark and he couldn't see like you can, so from his perspective, it might have just looked like you were running up the street for no reason. Or if he did see you chasing someone, he might have thought you were chasing down a student. Damn, he was right. I thought they were right behind me, but the crew might not know what happened at all. Well then, thank goodness I was strong enough to survive our fight. My analytical side gave me a very skeptical look. What? I said defensively. I'm still alive, and I have a plan to get out of here. At least my magic isn't being sucked out of me right now. He sighed and shook his head. I'm very glad you're alive, and I'm very glad you're not in a worse predicament. But it's your abilities that got us into this mess in the first place. If you'd had the same level of abilities as when you'd first met Carl, you'd have stayed behind the house shield and let Tyler and John handle things. You wouldn't know where Carl was or what he was up to, but you'd be safe. That is true, I said reluctantly. Then you chased Carl, fought him, and did so well you ran into the warehouse after him. You had no idea what you were getting into, and the smartest thing to do would have been to just stay outside and wait for backup. Instead, your abilities led you to believe that you could handle him. That is also true, I admitted. I wanted to argue, but he was right. I'd screwed up. If this ever happens again, the best plan would be to surround the warehouse with surfer dudes. That way he couldn't escape and then wait for backup. That way he couldn't escape unnoticed, then wait for backup. In this case, it would have been even better, as you'd have seen Marius show up and you could have fought him on your own. Marius seems to be a lover, not a fighter, so I'm sure you could have taken him. At that point, it still would have been best waiting for backup, as you didn't know what kind of weapons Carl could get his hands on. Even without Marius, those steel balls of his were intense. If you hadn't had your new shield, he would have killed you in a matter of seconds. He gave me a steely look. Yes, you've gotten a lot better fighting, and yes, your magic has gotten a lot stronger, but don't overestimate what you're capable of. What we want is people underestimating you because of your supernatural age. But if you think you're better than you really are, then you're going to bring a whole new level of stupid to your fights. He paused to let that sink in. And stupid people end up buried in stone, looking at the pretty lights and wondering how they're going to breathe. I got it, I said softly. You're right, and I got it. I think he thought I was going to try and justify my actions, as he continued to give me the whole parental, I'm so disappointed in you look. But there wasn't anything to justify, though. Being buried in stone was proof enough I should have done better. Finally, he sighed and gave me a big hug. They say the basis of good decisions is to first make bad decisions. You should be a freaking Steve Jobs after all this is done, he laughed wryly. Anyway, Enough about the past. Let's focus on what we have now. You got the start of a good plan to move forward. You're going to have a lot of time here, so start thinking about your magic and how you can improve it. You'll need to be better than you are now to escape. What I'd suggest at this point is to upgrade your miners. You need to break up a lot of rock, so they need to be as efficient and powerful as possible. Also, you've done everything you need to in this physical space. I think it's time to move to your throne room. My throne room? I'd completely forgotten about that. I mentally smacked my forehead. I felt like I was doing okay, but clearly the situation and the low oxygen meant I wasn't performing my best. I found my throne room after getting beaten up by Isabel at the park. I'd used it as a place to finally get some sleep. But Sandy had told me it was the center of my power and could be used for all kinds of advanced magic. I'd face down Thing 1 there, and Aggie had used it to tell me about Big Ugly and his gang, but it really wasn't on my list of useful places to visit. Maybe that needed to change, as it was sure going to be useful now. Tea already had me relaxed and in a light meditative state, so it was easy to feel my center and step inside. My throne room was much bigger than I remembered, which was super nice as I now had all the space to move around in. Before, my throne room had looked rather cozy and small, like it was part of a tiny but profitable kingdom. Now it looked like my kingdom had grown. My golden throne had gotten a lot bigger and looked very comfortable. It still looked good with this red velvet, but now it had lots of padding. There was a red runner on the floor leading up to the throne, which had been upgraded with golden tassels on the sides. The banners showing my past battles were still on the walls, and they included the new additions of my matches with Eugene and the Centaur Guard. The ceiling was at least 20 feet overhead, supported by wide wooden beams. 3 large chandeliers hung from the beams and provided lots of nice, comfortable lighting. Other than that, the place was empty. When the room had been smaller, the throne, tapestries, runner, and lighting had been enough. Now it felt like it was waiting for the rest of the furniture to show up. Normally, I might have been disappointed, but with the current events, all this empty space felt amazing. I promised the little boy in me that he could let loose and have a shit fit, and now was the time. I screamed and jumped and punched the air. Then I threw out my arms and just ran. I cussed and raged and punched the air some more as I sprinted around and around the room. It felt wonderful, and I just gave myself over to the moment. Being able to move felt so freaking good. I promised myself I'd never take my physical freedom for granted again. I thought I would rage for a while, but instead it quickly turned into a celebration of life. I called Penny and Eggie, and we turned it into a dance party. Eggie wanted his Macarenas again, and we got down to Gloria Estefan and the Miami Sound Machine for a while. I didn't know all the words to Congo, so we switched to Lady Gaga, Born This Way. We had a red runner, so it was only natural we switched to RuPaul next and did a little sashay on the runway. Surprisingly, it was Eggie in his liquid metal soldier form that had the best walk. He had tons of attitude and he just killed it. We didn't spend long, but a celebration was just what I needed. I got warm metal hugs from both of them, and I spent a moment standing strong in my place of power, just accepting where I was and what had happened. Some things had gone very well. Some things had sucked. I was alive, though, and I was ready to move on. Now it was time to make a kick-ass, highly detailed miner. I formed the miner in the space in front of me. It was nice because I didn't have to work with him on such a small scale. I gave him all the stuff I had before: overalls, goggles, a miner's helmet with a light, work boots, and a big mustache. I realized I hadn't added work gloves on my other miner, so I added those as well as a ring for duplication and a ring for resizing. For his weapon, I gave him a titanium pickaxe of blasting plus 50. It could do explosive damage on impact, as well as layer on heat or cold damage depending on what he was trying to get through. I added details like buttons, a bit of coal dust here and there, as well as a patch that said, "Pick us, and we'll pick for you." Normally, this is where I'd fill in with magic and use him as my template, but this time I needed more. Actually, I wanted more every time. "I wish there was a way to save you," I murmured out loud. "What do you mean?" Aggie asked. "Well, I'm going to spend a lot of time on this miner, making him as good as I possibly can. But the next time I need him, I'll have to start all over." Actually, it's been that way with almost all of my creations. Tea and red are useful all the time and stick around. But what about when I need my other peeps? "Well, you could always summon them again, right?" Aggie said, sounding confused. He didn't see the problem. "I can," I nodded. "But what about when I need them quickly? Take today's battle, for instance. If I had been able to instantly summon my flashers, I could have shut Carl down a whole lot faster. When I was first trapped in stone, if I'd been able to instantly summon my miners and ass blasters, I'd been able to get my air tunnel hollowed out a whole lot quicker." Aggie nodded in understanding. He got it now. "Plus, I want to have a breakthrough on how much detail I put into these guys," I continued. "Adding detail takes time, so I need a way to save my work. If I could do that, I could spend a week making the most amazing flasher. Then when I needed it for battle, I could have all that detail ready to light up in a second." "I see what you're hoping to do," Aggie said. "This is a project worthy of contemplation. I'll sit and think about it for you." "Thank you," I replied. "Let me know as soon as you have a solution." "Actually, I might be able to do what you're looking for," Penny spoke up. And that is the end of chapter Air. Our next chapter is, I love it, it's called Minor Detail. You gotta love the little pun in the name. Okay, if you're just reading it, if you're just visiting the chapter, now's a great time to stop. So the rest of it is kind of talking about book status and things like that. Okay, so I've written like the major battle is major, and I'm coming out the other end of it, and I'm on the downhill slope. So we still have the rest of the whole engagement. We have another chapter which is going to be about what happens, the aftermath and everything, and then we have the epilogue still to write. So I do not want to come out of my creative process, because the creative side is so different than the editing side. And if the editing side really gets engaged, then it'll just be this nitpicky voice in the back of my brain that just shuts the whole creative process down. So unfortunately, I've got to finish writing before I can really get into the editing side of it. So one of the things that I've really done up to this point to save myself a whole bunch of time is I have two people that are my editors. One's Harold, because I can be here and be like, "Harold, I gotta edit." He loves that. But he loves hearing the story too, so that's great. So anyway, it all works out. So he's very picky and good and clued into that sort of stuff. So he comes through and cleans up a bunch of stuff, and my lovely editor Dawn, and she comes through and looks at everything top to bottom and does her best there. So every chapter that I finish already has that polish to it. So beta readers. So I think what I'm going to do is have a separate, once I get everything done and I can officially switch to edit mode, then I will create a video just for the people who want to be beta readers. Or realistically, since you followed me on this journey, like really, if you just want to read it and enjoy it, you are welcome to it. having you all along for the journey has been fantastic. It's been so much fun and so exciting and so much more interactive. And yeah, like this book has gotten written a lot better because of you. So thank you. So anyway, opening that up for you and figuring out exactly how to do that. So that will be there for all the beta readers who want to read. The basis of beta reading basically is you're reading it and you're just letting me know the parts that trip you up. So for the people that are very nitpicky, that might be like verb tense changes. As I've been reading, sometimes I get people's name wrong. So, did I say Sandy and I really meant Annabeth? What? Hopefully there are no like big errors, but what are the things that trip you up? Did I say a sentence weirdly that you think, what do you mean by that? Or something like that. And so you can give me a comment or do a quick little edit the way I'm going to set it up, and you're off and running. So then that gives me the feedback, and then the final manuscript's so much better for all of your help. Okay, so I think that's where we're at. So I still don't have a timeline for putting the book out, just because I'm working on it. If I go too fast, it all comes crumbling down. So I'm just going to be creative as much as I can. I'm going to edit. We're going to get the edit done as quickly as I can. And then the book will be out. And then it'll be out when it's out. So thank you guys, and I will see you next week. Take care. Have a lovely week. Have a lovely Thanksgiving for everybody in the U.S. And see you then. Bye.